Cognitive Bias: How Our Minds Trick Us. Written and published by C.Irmici. Feel free to subscribe for more content. Now let's get into the book. Introduction: Unmasking the Hidden Forces of Cognitive Bias. Have you ever caught yourself jumping to conclusions, clinging to a decision that isn't quite right, or noticing only the information that reinforces what you already believe? You're not alone. These are all common examples of cognitive bias at work. Hidden mental shortcuts that shape the way we interpret, judge, and react to the world around us. Our brains, as fascinating as they are, often rely on these shortcuts to save time and energy. While they can be useful, they also distort our thinking in ways we don't always see coming. The truth is, cognitive biases are woven into the very fabric of human thought. They're like invisible filters over our minds, subtly influencing our beliefs, relationships, and decisions. Understanding cognitive biases doesn't mean we can eliminate them, we're all human after all, but it does give us a chance to recognize their influence and make more thoughtful choices. This awareness can change the way we approach everything from personal decisions to professional challenges, helping us question assumptions and ultimately grow. Throughout this book, we'll explore some of the most common cognitive biases that trick our minds every day. From confirmation bias, where we seek out only the information that supports what we already believe, to the halo effect, where a single positive trait influences our entire perception of someone, we'll take an honest look at how these biases shape our worldview. Each chapter dives into one bias at a time, unpacking why it exists, how it shows up in our lives, and what we can do about it. Along the way, you'll find relatable examples, thought-provoking questions, and practical tips to help you think more clearly, judge more fairly, and make decisions that align with your real values and goals. As you read, keep an open mind. Some of these biases may seem familiar, while others may surprise you. You might even feel a little defensive when you recognize one in your own thinking. That's completely natural. The goal isn't to feel bad about ourselves or become hypercritical. Instead, it's about gaining insight into our minds and learning how to use this knowledge to navigate our world with more intention and self-awareness. So, let's embark on this journey to unmask the hidden forces of cognitive bias. By the end, you'll have the tools to catch these biases in action, respond to them with curiosity, and begin making more balanced choices in every area of your life. Welcome to the world of cognitive bias. Prepare to see yourself and the world a little more clearly. Chapter 1: The Anatomy of Cognitive Bias. Imagine you're in a bustling cafe chatting with a friend. As you talk, you start noticing things. A person gesturing animatedly at a nearby table, the smell of coffee, your friend's voice rising and falling. But amidst this flurry of details, your mind is filtering out most of it, focusing only on what it deems relevant. Our brains are remarkably good at making these quick decisions, cutting through a world of sensory overload so we can concentrate on what's important. This is where cognitive biases come in. Cognitive biases are like mental shortcuts, helping us navigate an overwhelming amount of information quickly. Psychologists call these shortcuts heuristics, efficient rules or guidelines our minds create based on previous experiences to make rapid decisions. While these mental tricks help us survive and function, they don't always lead to the most accurate conclusions. These biases often influence our choices without us even realizing it, shaping our beliefs, assumptions, and actions in ways that feel automatic. Why cognitive biases exist? Cognitive biases have been with us for a long time, stemming from our evolutionary need to process information quickly. In our early days, we didn't have the luxury of slow, deliberate decision-making when faced with immediate threats. A rustling in the bushes might be the wind, but it could also be a predator. Our ancestors who reacted quickly to potential dangers tended to survive, so this rapid processing became ingrained. The brain began to favor efficiency over accuracy, a trait that's still deeply rooted in our decision-making today. In modern times, though, these shortcuts don't always serve us as well as they did in the wild. In fact, they often lead us astray. For example, our brains tend to simplify complex information to make it more digestible, which can result in oversimplified judgments or assumptions. The result? Biases that can cloud our thinking in ways we're rarely aware of. Types of cognitive biases. A sneak peek. There are dozens of recognized cognitive biases, each with its own unique influence on our thinking. Here are just a few that we'll explore in detail throughout this book. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already believe. Anchoring bias, the reliance on the first piece of information encountered when making decisions. Availability heuristic, when we overestimate the importance of information that comes to mind quickly, often because it's recent or emotionally impactful. Halo effect, how one trait, often unrelated, colors our entire perception of a person or thing. Each bias operates differently but shares a common thread. They lead us to filter information through a subjective lens rather than a purely logical one. The cost of biases. What's at stake? Cognitive biases don't just exist in a vacuum. They influence countless aspects of our lives, from the personal to the professional. Imagine a hiring manager reviewing a candidate's resume. The first impression, anchoring bias, might lead them to give undue weight to the first few lines they read, whether positive or negative. This initial assessment can color their view of the entire application. Or think of how confirmation bias might affect someone's political views. Rather than seeking balanced information, they tend to gravitate toward sources that confirm what they already think, reinforcing a possibly narrow worldview. The stakes are high because biases can impact our decisions in significant ways. Our relationships, careers, financial decisions, and even health choices can all be swayed by these subtle mental habits. But with awareness, we can start to shift our approach. Recognizing bias, the first step toward change. The most powerful tool for combating cognitive bias is self-awareness. Simply being aware that these biases exist and understanding how they work can make a big difference. Once we see how biases creep into our thinking, we can begin to slow down, question our assumptions, and make more deliberate decisions. One of the most effective ways to recognize bias is to ask ourselves questions. When forming an opinion or making a choice, try asking, am I considering all sides? Do I have enough information, or am I leaning too heavily on what I already know? Could I be influenced by recent events or by what I heard first? This practice of reflection allows us to bring a touch of intentionality to the fast, automatic processes of the mind. In this chapter, we've laid the foundation for understanding cognitive biases, the evolutionary advantages they offer, and the ways they can mislead us. Now that we've introduced the concept, we'll delve deeper into individual biases, exploring how each one influences our thoughts and decisions. As we move forward, keep in mind that these biases are universal. They don't mean we're flawed, they mean we're human. By becoming more aware, we gain the opportunity to make better choices, stay open-minded, and see the world a little more clearly. Chapter 2, Confirmation Bias, Seeing What We Want to See. Imagine you're debating with a friend about a topic you feel strongly about. Let's say whether a certain diet is the healthiest choice. You both pull out your phones to look up facts. Quickly, you find articles and studies that back up your point of view, confident that your position is right. But here's the catch. Your friend does the same, finding sources that confirm their belief as well. How can two people, each using what seems like credible information, come away with completely opposing conclusions? This is confirmation bias at work. What is confirmation bias? Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what we already believe. It's one of the most pervasive and, often, most deceptive cognitive biases. When under the influence of confirmation bias, we give more weight to evidence that supports our beliefs, while disregarding or undervaluing information that contradicts them. This doesn't happen because we're deliberately ignoring the facts. Rather, it's a natural shortcut our brains take to make processing information easier. This bias affects how we gather information, judge new ideas, and even recall past events. By reinforcing our existing beliefs, confirmation bias gives us a sense of security. We feel validated and assured in our understanding of the world. But this comfort comes at a cost. It narrows our perspective and limits our capacity to grow, question, and change. Why does confirmation bias happen? At its core, confirmation bias stems from a human need for consistency. Psychologists have found that our minds favor harmony and resist conflict. When we encounter information that challenges our worldview, it creates a state known as cognitive dissonance. the discomfort we feel when we hold conflicting beliefs or ideas. Rather than wrestling with that discomfort, it's easier and faster to align our perception with what we already think. For instance, if you strongly believe in the effectiveness of a particular health supplement, you're likely to focus on studies that highlight its benefits while downplaying any research suggesting otherwise. Our brains do this to protect us from the unsettling feeling of having our beliefs challenged. Evolutionarily, it's also linked to survival. Sticking to familiar ideas or practices could have made life more predictable and safer for our ancestors. The impact of confirmation bias in everyday life. Confirmation bias doesn't just affect what we think, it influences how we behave. Let's look at a few examples where this bias plays out in real life and how it can shape decisions. Personal beliefs and attitudes. Think about politics, a field where confirmation bias is especially strong. People often seek out news outlets or online communities that align with their pre-existing beliefs. By surrounding ourselves with like-minded perspectives, we reinforce our views and deepen the divide between us and them. This can lead to polarization and make it harder for people to understand or empathize with differing viewpoints. Relationships. In relationships, confirmation bias can subtly distort our perception of others. If you believe that a colleague is difficult to work with, you'll likely notice every instance where they're being uncooperative while ignoring moments when they're helpful. Over time, this selective perception reinforces your belief, potentially harming a relationship that might have been different if viewed through a less biased lens. Health and lifestyle choices. Confirmation bias often shapes our approach to health and wellness. For instance, if someone believes that a particular diet is beneficial, they might selectively read only positive reports on it while ignoring studies that offer a more balanced view. This can lead to an unbalanced understanding of what might actually be best for their health. Investing and financial decisions. Investors frequently fall prey to confirmation bias, especially when it comes to stocks they already own. Instead of taking in the full picture, they focus on news that suggests their chosen stock will rise, while downplaying any signs of potential risk. This selective approach can lead to poor financial choices based on incomplete information. Recognizing confirmation bias in action. One of the most powerful tools for overcoming confirmation bias is awareness. Recognizing when this bias is in play can allow us to step back and question our thinking before making a decision. Here are a few strategies to help identify confirmation bias. 1. Ask yourself, am I seeking diverse sources? When gathering information, make an effort to consult multiple sources, especially those that may not align with your initial beliefs. For instance, if you're researching a new topic, seek out perspectives from reputable sources on different sides of the issue. By doing so, you're more likely to get a balanced view. 2. Challenge your assumptions. Consciously ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? This simple question can be surprisingly effective. When we challenge our own beliefs, we open ourselves up to possibilities we might not have considered otherwise. This doesn't mean you have to abandon your beliefs, but it does encourage a more thoughtful, critical approach. 3. Practice active listening. Especially in discussions or debates, try to genuinely understand the other person's perspective rather than focusing on countering their points. Active listening can help you see where confirmation bias may be blocking you from fully appreciating another person's viewpoint. 4. Keep a biased journal. Try writing down instances when you catch yourself selectively seeking information or judging others. Recording these moments can help you spot patterns in your thinking and become more mindful over time. Confirmation bias in the online world. In the digital age, confirmation bias is reinforced like never before. Algorithms on social media and search engines track our preferences, showing us more of what we already like. This phenomenon, known as an echo chamber, makes it increasingly easy to surround ourselves with information that supports our beliefs while filtering out conflicting perspectives. As a result, we end up in filter bubbles that can reinforce our biases even further. Consider a simple example: searching for reviews of a product you're considering buying. If you already believe the product is great, you're more likely to click on and believe the positive reviews. Algorithms notice your clicks and may show you even more positive content, further reinforcing your initial opinion. In this way, our online habits can lead to increasingly narrow viewpoints, unless we make a conscious effort to seek diversity in our information sources. Moving beyond confirmation bias. The path to overcoming confirmation bias is not about becoming a neutral person who has no opinions. It's about learning to hold our beliefs with curiosity and flexibility. By questioning our assumptions, seeking out balanced information, and remaining open to change, we can cultivate a mindset that values understanding over validation. This doesn't mean abandoning deeply held beliefs, but rather making them more resilient by ensuring they're based on a fuller, more accurate picture of the world. As we journey through this book, we'll continue to uncover cognitive biases, each one adding another layer to our understanding of how our minds work. Next up, we'll explore the anchoring bias, a mental shortcut that shapes our decisions by placing too much weight on the first piece of information we encounter. Like confirmation bias, it can subtly influence our choices in ways we might not expect. Let's dig deeper and continue building our toolkit for more balanced, intentional thinking. Chapter 3: Anchoring Bias, the Power of First Impressions. Imagine you're buying a car. The salesperson tells you the first model you look at costs $30,000. As you continue to look at other cars, from budget to luxury models, you can't help but compare them all to that initial $30,000 price tag. Even when you find a cheaper car, part of you feels like you're getting an incredible deal by comparison. This is anchoring bias at work, a cognitive tendency to rely heavily on the first piece of information, or anchor, we encounter when making decisions. Anchoring bias is surprisingly powerful. That initial figure, statistic, or detail we're exposed to holds an outsized influence over subsequent judgments. It's not always a price tag. It could be a statistic, a piece of data, or even the first impression we form of someone. This bias isn't about willful ignorance or lack of experience. It's about how our brains process information. Once an anchor is set, our minds tend to adjust our thinking around it rather than starting fresh with each new piece of information. Anchoring is a natural and efficient mental shortcut, but it often leads us astray. Why our brains rely on anchors. The origins of anchoring bias are rooted in the brain's need for efficiency. We're faced with countless choices and data points each day, and processing all of them individually would be mentally exhausting. So, when we encounter new information, our brains often latch onto the first piece of data, using it as a benchmark. This benchmark, or anchor, simplifies our decision-making by giving us a quick starting point. For many routine choices, this shortcut is helpful. But in complex situations, it can distort our thinking in ways that we may not realize. Take salary negotiations as another example. If a job candidate suggests a salary range of $60,000 to $70,000, they're setting an anchor. The employer, even if they were initially considering a lower salary, is likely to adjust their offer closer to this anchor. By establishing a starting figure, the candidate influences the conversation. The employer may think they're negotiating objectively, but research shows that the anchor has a lasting impact, subtly steering the final offer. Anchoring bias doesn't just affect large decisions. It permeates small, everyday choices as well. Think about restaurant menus. Have you ever noticed that some menus list the most expensive items first? This is often done deliberately to set a high anchor, making other items appear more reasonably priced by comparison. Whether we're aware of it or not, anchors shape our perceptions constantly. How anchoring bias manifests in different contexts. Anchoring bias appears in a wide range of situations, from financial decisions to social interactions. Consider real estate. Prospective homebuyers are often anchored by the list price of a property, even if it's out of line with market value. That first figure looms large, influencing how buyers assess the home and any adjustments they're willing to consider. Even after seeing other houses, the anchor remains, subtly shaping perceptions of value. This bias doesn't only show up in financial matters. Anchoring also influences how we view people. Imagine you're meeting a new colleague and someone mentions that they're incredibly organized but can be a little intense. Right away, your perception is anchored by this description. Even if your colleague seems relaxed and pleasant later, that initial impression colors your interactions. Anchors can be powerful because they're immediate, shaping our perceptions before we've had a chance to form independent opinions. In the judicial system, anchoring bias has even been shown to influence sentencing. Studies reveal that judges, when given a suggested sentencing term, are often swayed by that initial figure, even if it's irrelevant or arbitrary. Anchoring doesn't just shape our choices in mundane matters, it can impact serious, consequential decisions as well. Breaking free from the grip of anchoring bias. Awareness is the first step in countering anchoring bias, but it isn't always easy to spot in the moment. This bias is often subtle, disguising itself as reasonableness or context. One of the best ways to counter it is to make a conscious effort to reevaluate information independently. Here are some strategies that can help. 1. Slow down the decision-making process. When you recognize that you might be influenced by an anchor, slow down and give yourself time to process. Pause, take a few deep breaths, and mentally separate the anchor from your decision. Ask yourself, if I hadn't heard that first number, would I view the situation differently? Deliberately stepping back can give you a clearer perspective. 2. Seek a variety of data points. In situations where anchoring might affect your choice, like pricing, salary negotiations, or large purchases, actively seek out multiple sources of information. Look at comparables, check averages, and avoid focusing too heavily on any single figure. This can help you gain a balanced view and prevent any one anchor from disproportionately influencing your choice. 3. Challenge the anchor. Anchors are often arbitrary. If a salesperson offers a high initial price, ask for the rationale behind it. If a colleague describes someone in a way that might bias your view, remind yourself that their perception is subjective. By questioning the validity of anchors, you can start to dismantle their power. Anchoring bias in the digital world. The online world is rife with anchors. From the original price on e-commerce sites to the suggested donations on fundraising pages, anchors are used to steer consumer behavior. Let's consider the world of online shopping. If you see a shirt listed as $100, now only $50, that $100 original price serves as an anchor, making the discounted price seem more appealing. This pricing tactic, known as price anchoring, is used widely in marketing to nudge consumers toward a desired outcome. While it's a legitimate sales tool, it can lead to poor financial choices if we rely on the anchor alone rather than considering what the item is truly worth to us. Social media platforms are also filled with subtle anchors, especially when it comes to content engagement. For instance, a post that has already garnered thousands of likes and comments creates a social anchor, suggesting it's popular and worth engaging with. This can lead us to evaluate the content more favorably, influenced by the anchor of social validation. In a world where algorithms are constantly shaping what we see, understanding anchoring bias is key to developing a more critical, independent view. Real-world stories of anchoring bias. Let's look at a real-world example. In a study conducted by behavioral economists, participants were asked to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number. Then they were shown items like wine and asked how much they would pay for them. Surprisingly, participants with higher social security digits listed significantly higher prices. This seemingly arbitrary anchor affected their willingness to spend, illustrating just how powerful, even nonsensical, anchors can be. Another example comes from salary negotiation. A well-known tech company experimented with presenting job candidates with a high initial offer compared to industry standards. This anchored candidates' expectations, making the offer appear attractive and resulting in faster acceptances. Even in high-stakes situations, our decisions are often anchored by the first figures we see, whether they're reasonable or not. Moving forward, making conscious choices. Anchoring bias reminds us that our decisions aren't always as logical as we might assume. Recognizing the power of first impressions, whether it's a price, a description, or a reputation, gives us the chance to reclaim control over our judgments. Rather than seeing each new piece of information through the lens of the first, we can learn to approach decisions with a fresh perspective, independent of initial influences. In this chapter, we've uncovered the way anchoring shapes our thinking and actions, often without us realizing it. By slowing down, questioning initial figures, and considering alternative data points, we can begin to minimize anchoring's impact. Anchors may help us make fast choices, but by being mindful of their influence, we can make more informed and balanced decisions. Chapter 4. Availability Heuristic, the influence of recent events. Imagine this. You're scrolling through the news and you see several alarming stories in quick succession. There's an article about a plane crash, a report of a violent crime in your city, and a piece on a new rapidly spreading virus. By the end of your scrolling session, you're feeling tense, perhaps even a bit fearful. As you go about your day, you start thinking more about these dangers, subtly adjusting your behavior. Maybe you reconsider an upcoming flight, feel a bit wary in unfamiliar places, or stock up on hand sanitizer. This is the availability heuristic at work. A mental shortcut that leads us to overestimate the likelihood of events based on how easily we can recall them. The availability heuristic is a powerful cognitive bias that shapes our perception of risk and frequency. When an event is vivid, recent, or emotionally charged, it's easier for our brains to recall. Our minds tend to equate easier to remember with more likely to happen. This bias isn't intentional, it's simply the brain's way of making sense of a complex world. But it often leads to distorted views, creating anxiety over low-risk situations or causing us to underestimate common but less memorable threats. Why our minds lean on the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is rooted in the brain's need for efficiency and survival. In our evolutionary past, remembering recent or dramatic events was essential. If our ancestors saw another person attacked by a predator at a nearby river, their brain likely stored that incident front and center, helping them avoid danger by recalling it whenever they approached water. This mental shortcut kept them vigilant about threats in their environment, a trait that significantly improved survival. Today, however, the availability heuristic can have counterproductive effects. We live in an information-saturated world, exposed to dramatic stories daily, especially with the constant cycle of news and social media. Our brains still operate as if these vivid memories represent actual, immediate danger, even when we're relatively safe. Seeing an alarming story about a violent event doesn't mean it's common, but the intensity of our recall can make it feel that way. In this way, the availability heuristic tends to skew our sense of risk and probability, making rare events seem common and making common risks seem negligible. The real-life impact of the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic doesn't just create personal anxieties, it also affects society on a larger scale. Consider the public's perception of air travel versus car travel. Plane crashes, though extremely rare, are highly memorable. When they happen, they receive intense media coverage with details that stick in our minds. Images of wreckage, eyewitness accounts, investigations. Car accidents, by contrast, are much more common but rarely receive the same attention unless they're particularly horrific. This difference in exposure leads many people to feel more afraid of flying than driving, despite the statistical reality that air travel is significantly safer. This bias also extends to our health concerns. For instance, after watching media coverage of an unusual disease outbreak, people might feel a heightened need to take precautions, even if the disease poses a relatively low risk compared to more common health threats. By contrast, conditions like heart disease, which kills millions worldwide, rarely receive the same kind of dramatic, sustained media attention. People are therefore less likely to feel the same urgency about preventive measures for heart disease as they are about high-profile outbreaks, even though the risk of heart disease is much higher. Social attitudes are similarly shaped by the availability heuristic. If we frequently hear about instances of certain types of crime or social unrest, we may start to believe these incidents are more common than they actually are. This can lead to policy demands, changes in community behavior, or shifts in how people relate to one another, based on a perception of reality that doesn't necessarily reflect true frequencies. How media amplifies the availability heuristic. The 24-hour news cycle and social media platforms are powerful amplifiers of the availability heuristic. By prioritizing dramatic or unusual events, media outlets capture our attention but also skew our perceptions. For example, when a rare but terrifying event occurs, such as a mass shooting, an act of terrorism, or a major natural disaster, the extensive media coverage and social media reactions make the event feel larger and more immediate in our minds. Even if we logically understand these events are rare, Our emotions tell us otherwise, and we often act accordingly. On social media, the availability heuristic is even further reinforced by trending topics and viral posts. When an event goes viral, it gains momentum, spreading quickly across timelines and headlines. This rapid exposure creates a sense of immediacy and importance, as if the event represents a widespread or frequent occurrence. We're bombarded with emotional responses, opinions, and discussions, which make the event difficult to forget. This effect intensifies our feeling that the event is common, urgent, or likely to happen again soon, even when that's not statistically true. Imagine you see a friend share a post about a recent crime near your neighborhood. It's accompanied by personal comments, photos, and reactions from others, making the event more vivid. You're more likely to remember that story and less likely to consider broader statistics, which show that the area is generally safe. The vividness of the event, combined with the availability heuristic, means that the memory sticks, affecting your sense of security, even if rationally you know the likelihood of danger remains low. Combating the availability heuristic. Recognizing and addressing the availability heuristic isn't about ignoring real risks. It's about achieving a balanced, more realistic understanding of probability. To counter the availability heuristic, it's important to actively seek out broader perspectives, especially statistical data that offer a clear, evidence-based view. One of the best tools for overcoming this bias is questioning how representative an event truly is. When a particular news story or event feels significant, ask yourself, is this an isolated case? Does it reflect the bigger picture? By stepping back and analyzing the data, you can place the event in context, gaining a sense of how common or rare it actually is. Another helpful approach is to diversify your sources of information. If your primary source of news is particularly sensational or focused on specific types of stories, consider expanding your reading to include outlets that offer data-driven, balanced coverage. This practice doesn't only apply to news but to any type of information you're absorbing. When we see only high-emotion, high-drama narratives, we're more likely to misjudge their relevance to our lives. Lastly, remind yourself that memorable events often leave an emotional imprint that skews our thinking. Emotions are powerful motivators, and our minds tend to treat them as signals of importance. But by recognizing this effect, you can train yourself to pause and think critically before letting vivid memories dictate your actions. A real-world example: the aftermath of natural disasters. The availability heuristic is especially pronounced in the aftermath of natural disasters. When a major earthquake, hurricane, or flood strikes, media coverage spikes, and for good reason. These are devastating events with immediate consequences. However, this exposure can make people overestimate the likelihood of such events happening in their area, even if they live in a region where these risks are low. For instance, after a powerful hurricane strikes, people living far inland might suddenly feel the need to prepare for a similar storm, even if they're in a low-risk area. In regions with real exposure, awareness and preparedness are wise, but elsewhere, the risk remains minimal. The availability heuristic makes the event feel omnipresent, pushing people to take actions that may not align with actual localized risks. A similar phenomenon occurs with air travel after a high-profile plane crash. Flight bookings tend to dip, and people often express heightened fears, even though statistically, air travel remains one of the safest modes of transportation. The crash is vivid, recent, and emotional, leading our brains to give it more weight than warranted by the probabilities. Rethinking risk and reality. The availability heuristic shows us just how much our perceptions can be shaped by immediacy and emotion. Our brains are built to remember what's recent and intense, but by pausing to evaluate the true likelihood of events, we can develop a more accurate, less reactionary view of the world. This isn't about ignoring real dangers but about seeing them in their proper context, so that our actions are informed and proportionate. Chapter 5. The Halo Effect: How One Trait Colors Everything. Imagine you're meeting someone for the first time. They walk into the room with a confident smile, well-dressed and articulate, introducing themselves with a friendly handshake. Instantly, you find yourself liking them, perhaps even forming a positive impression of their intelligence, kindness, or trustworthiness. What you're experiencing is known as the halo effect. a cognitive bias that leads us to allow one positive quality or characteristic to shape our entire perception of a person, object, or situation. It's as if one favorable trait casts a halo over everything else, blurring our ability to assess other traits independently. The halo effect is incredibly powerful, often leading us to make sweeping assumptions based on limited information. When someone is attractive, we may subconsciously assume they're also intelligent, capable, or ethical, even though appearance has no real bearing on these qualities. If someone is highly skilled in one area, we might assume they excel in others. This bias isn't necessarily a conscious choice. It's a natural tendency, a shortcut our brains take to simplify the complex task of evaluating others. However, while the halo effect may make decisions easier, it can also lead to distorted judgments and missed opportunities for true understanding. Origins of the halo effect: a psychological short circuit. The halo effect has roots in our brain's need for efficiency. Assessing people and situations quickly has always been important for survival, especially when resources, allies, or threats must be identified on the spot. Our ancestors needed quick assessments of others' intentions and abilities to form groups, avoid danger, or compete for resources. As a result, the brain developed shortcuts for rapidly judging others, often based on a few prominent traits or signals. In the modern world, where first impressions can make a significant difference in social, professional, and even political contexts, the halo effect continues to play a role. Psychologists have noted that we tend to favor positive first impressions, which often color our perception of everything that follows. It's why a polished resume, a well-chosen outfit, or a charismatic introduction can carry so much weight. These initial cues serve as anchors, shaping our thoughts about a person's competence, character, and worth long after that first interaction. This bias is especially evident in environments where people make quick, high-stakes decisions, like hiring, judging a candidate for a promotion, or evaluating a person's trustworthiness. The halo effect makes us believe that if someone has one good quality, other qualities must also align with that perception. While this can sometimes lead to accurate judgments, it also often leads us to overlook weaknesses, limitations, or red flags. The halo effect in action: how it shapes our perceptions. The halo effect plays out in numerous ways in everyday life, impacting not only our interpersonal relationships but also our views on brands, products, leaders, and even entire groups of people. Take, for example, a celebrity who excels in one particular field, such as acting. Fans may assume that this person is also wise, ethical, or capable of speaking knowledgeably on various topics simply because they are skilled in their craft. This halo around their talent can lead people to take their opinions seriously, even if the celebrity lacks expertise in those areas. Another instance of the halo effect can be seen in education. Teachers, for example, are often influenced by a student's demeanor and appearance. Studies have shown that when a student is well-behaved and presentable, teachers may rate their academic performance more favorably, even if the student's actual work doesn't warrant high marks. The student's positive behavior creates a halo, which influences the teacher's perception of their overall abilities. In the workplace, the halo effect can influence hiring decisions. If a candidate has a prestigious degree, is well-spoken, or appears confident, an employer might assume they are more competent than they actually are. This halo effect can be so powerful that the interviewer may overlook actual skills and experience, hiring someone based on perceived potential rather than objective qualifications. This bias doesn't just stop at hiring. It can affect performance evaluations, project assignments, and opportunities for promotion. The halo effect can even shape our perception of entire brands. Take a well-known tech company that's known for innovation and high-quality products. Because of its reputation, consumers may assume that every product it releases is revolutionary and well-designed, even without closely evaluating each item. This assumption may lead people to overlook flaws or limitations in specific products simply because they trust the brand's overarching halo. The reverse of the halo effect: the horn effect. Just as a positive trait can create a halo, a negative trait can create a horn effect. This is when one perceived flaw or negative characteristic leads us to assume other negative attributes as well. If a person comes across as unkempt or unfriendly, we may, consciously or unconsciously, associate them with other negative qualities such as being unreliable, less competent, or difficult to work with. The horn effect is particularly problematic because it prevents us from seeing people in a balanced way, making it harder to appreciate their strengths or potential contributions. Imagine, for example, a job candidate who seems nervous and unpolished during an interview. The interviewer might allow this one aspect to color their entire impression, overlooking the candidate's qualifications and potential simply because of an initial negative impression. The horn effect can lead to biased decisions and missed opportunities, as it makes it challenging for us to separate one characteristic from the whole. Why the halo and horn effects persist. Our brains naturally seek out patterns, and the halo and horn effects are products of this tendency. When we see one good or bad quality, we instinctively fill in the blanks, assuming consistency across other traits. This inclination is partly due to cognitive ease. Filling in the blanks with assumptions requires less mental energy than carefully evaluating each trait on its own. Additionally, the halo effect persists because it often feels rewarding to see people and things in a simplified, consistent way. When we like someone, it's pleasant to believe they are as good as they seem. Conversely, when we dislike someone, it feels easier to assume their qualities are consistently negative. The halo and horn effects provide us with a feeling of coherence and control, making the world seem more predictable. Breaking free from the halo effect. Overcoming the halo effect requires conscious effort, as it's a deeply ingrained bias. Here are some approaches that can help counteract it. First, pause before forming judgments. When you meet someone new or evaluate a situation, make a deliberate effort to focus on individual traits rather than letting one quality overshadow others. For example, if a job candidate impresses you with their confidence, remind yourself to evaluate their other qualifications independently. This pause can be difficult, especially in high-stakes situations where quick judgments feel necessary, but it's crucial for avoiding skewed perceptions. Next, consider evidence objectively. Try to separate your emotional response from the facts. If you're assessing someone's skills or qualities, focus on tangible accomplishments, skills, and experience, rather than relying on the initial impression they made. Creating checklists or criteria can help, as it forces you to evaluate each trait separately rather than letting one characteristic dominate your view. Another helpful approach is to seek second opinions. When possible, ask for the perspectives of others who may have observed the person or situation from a different angle. This can provide balance and reveal aspects that the halo effect may have caused you to overlook. For instance, in a hiring context, you might involve multiple interviewers to gain a more rounded view of a candidate. Real-world implications of the halo effect. The halo effect's influence can have profound implications. It can affect legal judgments, where a well-dressed, polite defendant might be perceived as more trustworthy, potentially influencing the jury's decision. In healthcare, studies have found that doctors sometimes allow the halo effect to influence their treatment decisions, with patients who appear well-informed or proactive being viewed as healthier or more compliant, even without evidence. This bias can also shape societal issues such as how we perceive leaders. Charismatic leaders often benefit from the halo effect, where their charm and persuasive skills lead us to assume competence, even in areas outside their expertise. In romantic relationships, the halo effect can be especially strong. When we fall for someone, we often idealize them, seeing their positive traits while ignoring potential incompatibilities or flaws. This love blindness can lead to misunderstandings or disappointments later, as the initial halo fades, revealing the more nuanced and complex reality of the person. The halo effect, ultimately, is a reminder of how subjective our perceptions can be. While it's natural to lean on first impressions, these biases limit our understanding, keeping us from seeing people and situations as they truly are. By practicing awareness and challenging our initial reactions, we can start to see the world, and the people in it, with greater clarity and depth. Chapter 6: Sunk Cost Fallacy, Why We Hold On to Lost Causes. Imagine you've started watching a movie. Halfway through, it's clear the plot is thin, the acting is subpar, and you're not enjoying it. Yet you tell yourself, I've already watched an hour, I might as well finish it. This is the sunk cost fallacy in action. It's the tendency to continue investing in something simply because we've already invested time, money, or energy into it, even when the returns aren't there. The sunk cost fallacy drives many of our daily choices, from sticking with an underwhelming movie to staying in a job that doesn't fulfill us. We hold on to these investments because the thought of wasting our initial effort feels unbearable. This bias doesn't stem from rational decision-making. Instead, it's tied to our emotions, particularly our reluctance to acknowledge loss or admit we made a mistake. The irony is that by staying committed to things no longer serving us, we often end up losing even more. The psychological roots of the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is a product of two primary psychological forces: loss aversion and our desire for consistency. Loss aversion refers to the fact that humans tend to feel the pain of loss more acutely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Losing something, whether it's money, time, or effort, feels intensely uncomfortable, so we're wired to avoid it whenever possible. This aversion makes it hard to cut our losses because doing so feels like accepting defeat. By sticking with our initial investment, even when it's clear the payoff is limited, we avoid the psychological discomfort of admitting a loss. Another factor at play is our need for consistency. When we make a decision, like choosing a career path, starting a relationship, or buying an expensive product, our self-image becomes tied to that choice. To abandon it feels like admitting inconsistency or failure, which can be jarring. The sunk cost fallacy allows us to protect our self-image by maintaining the course, even when it's clear the path may no longer serve us. Interestingly, the sunk cost fallacy is not only an individual tendency but also a social one. We fear the judgment of others. The idea of explaining why we left a job after only a few months or stopped working on a long-term project can feel embarrassing. This social dimension adds another layer of resistance, compelling us to stick with choices that may no longer align with our goals simply to avoid the perception of inconsistency or failure. Everyday examples of the sunk cost fallacy. This fallacy is surprisingly common in our lives, shaping choices in ways we often don't recognize. Consider a couple who has been in a long-term relationship that's no longer fulfilling or healthy. They may stay together because they've put so many years into it, rather than focusing on their happiness or compatibility in the present. The thought of wasting those years holds them back, even if it means postponing their chance for a more fulfilling future. In the professional world, the sunk cost fallacy often manifests as career inertia. Imagine an individual who has spent years working in a particular field, investing heavily in education, training, and networking. Even if they feel unfulfilled and yearn for a different path, they may resist change because of the investment they've already made. The cost of changing feels steep even if they're currently dissatisfied. This commitment to the sunk cost keeps them tied to a trajectory that no longer aligns with their aspirations. A powerful example of the sunk cost fallacy in the business world is found in corporate projects that are clearly failing but continue to receive funding. Managers often keep pouring resources into projects that are over budget or missing milestones, reluctant to acknowledge the initial investment as a loss. By doubling down on these sunk investments, companies can end up incurring even greater losses, all in the name of preserving prior commitments. How the sunk cost fallacy shapes decision-making. The sunk cost fallacy reveals itself in countless small ways. Think about food, for instance. When we've paid for a large meal at a restaurant, many of us feel compelled to finish it, even when we're already full. The cost has been paid, but the feeling that we'll get our money's worth keeps us eating, disregarding our physical comfort. Similarly, when we buy tickets to a concert or event we end up not wanting to attend, we may still go just because we spent the money, even if staying home would make us happier. This fallacy isn't limited to the past. It also impacts our ability to make future-oriented decisions. When we focus on sunk costs, we ignore the potential for better outcomes down the line. By remaining loyal to previous choices, we often sacrifice future opportunities, creating a self-imposed barrier to new experiences or more aligned goals. Our minds convince us that abandoning something means admitting failure, when in reality, pivoting may open doors to growth and discovery. The sunk cost fallacy in the digital age. In today's digital world, the sunk cost fallacy has new avenues for influence, especially in online shopping and subscriptions. Consider streaming services. We may pay for a monthly subscription to a service we barely use, but instead of canceling, we justify the expense by occasionally watching something we're only half interested in. The same goes for smartphone apps that offer upgrades or in-app purchases. After spending money on a game or service, we're more likely to keep engaging with it, feeling compelled to get our money's worth, even if our interest has waned. Social media is another fertile ground for this fallacy. Imagine spending hours crafting a post or updating a profile for a particular purpose, only to realize it doesn't serve you as much as expected. Instead of pivoting, people may continue using the platform the same way, investing more time in it simply because of the initial effort put into building a presence. This dedication to sunk costs is not just a financial or emotional drain. It's a use of time and energy that could be better directed elsewhere. How to overcome the sunk cost fallacy. Breaking free from the sunk cost fallacy is challenging because it goes against our natural inclinations. But with conscious effort, we can train ourselves to make decisions based on the future rather than clinging to the past. One of the most effective ways to counter this bias is to shift your perspective to the present. When faced with a decision, ask yourself, if I hadn't already invested in this, would I still choose it today? This question helps separate the past investment from the current choice, allowing you to evaluate it based on present-day relevance and alignment with your goals. By refocusing on the here and now, you can reduce the emotional attachment to past efforts. Another approach is to embrace the idea that not all investments yield returns. Accepting that some ventures will end in loss can actually be liberating. Recognize that learning from a sunk cost can provide valuable insight, even if the investment itself didn't turn out as planned. Every experience, even if it ends in a loss, contributes to personal growth, so you're not truly starting from zero. By framing it as a learning opportunity, you can detach from the feeling of wasted effort and make room for new opportunities. It can also be helpful to envision the potential outcomes of letting go. Ask yourself, what could I gain if I stopped investing in this? Imagining the freedom and possibilities that come from releasing unproductive commitments can shift your focus from loss to opportunity. This reorientation allows you to see that moving on isn't about waste. It's about creating space for growth and alignment with your true goals. Real-world examples of moving past sunk costs. To see the power of letting go, consider a well-known example from the world of technology. When Apple was developing the original iPhone, the company initially focused on using a plastic screen, which was cheaper and easier to manufacture. But halfway through development, Steve Jobs decided that glass would provide a more durable, high-quality product, even though it meant scrapping a significant investment in plastic screen production. Apple cut its losses and switched to glass, a decision that contributed to the iPhone's success. By not succumbing to the sunk cost fallacy, the company was able to make a more future-oriented choice, one that ultimately paid off. Another example can be found in the film industry. Directors and studios often pour enormous resources into films, and some projects prove unworkable or destined for failure. In such cases, production companies occasionally make the difficult decision to halt the project altogether, rather than sinking further funds into a film that may fail to recoup its costs. By cutting their losses, studios protect themselves from greater financial damage, even if the decision to halt feels painful. Embracing change over commitment. The sunk cost fallacy shows us how challenging it can be to let go, even when it's in our best interest. Recognizing that past investments don't determine future success requires a mental shift, one that values adaptability over rigid commitment. When we release the weight of sunk costs, we're able to make choices that genuinely serve us, creating room for growth, exploration, and fulfillment. Each time we let go of a sunk investment, whether it's a project, a relationship, or a habit, we gain a little more clarity and courage for the future. Learning to walk away from things that no longer serve us isn't about giving up. It's about making room for choices that align with our current needs and values. Chapter 7. Overconfidence Bias, the Illusion of Certainty. Picture yourself in a trivia game. The host asks a question you're sure you know the answer to, so you confidently give your response. But when the correct answer is revealed, it's different from what you thought. A mix of surprise and disbelief hits you. How could you have been so sure, yet so wrong? This is overconfidence bias at work, the tendency to overestimate our knowledge, abilities, and control over situations. Overconfidence bias isn't just a minor quirk. It's a deeply ingrained cognitive habit that affects decisions big and small. It can lead us to take risks we aren't prepared for, underestimate challenges, or ignore helpful advice. While confidence is an essential quality, enabling us to face challenges and pursue ambitious goals, overconfidence takes it a step further, blurring the line between healthy self-assurance and an inflated sense of certainty. When we fall prey to overconfidence bias, we're likely to make decisions based on our perception of knowing better or being capable, rather than on an accurate assessment of reality. Why overconfidence is so compelling. Overconfidence stems from a complex mix of psychological needs, one of which is the desire for control. By feeling certain about our knowledge or abilities, we gain a comforting sense of command over our lives and surroundings. This need for control is closely tied to self-esteem. Believing in our competence boosts our confidence and helps us feel capable of navigating the world. Yet, this assurance can also blind us to our limitations, making us more prone to take on challenges beyond our current level of skill or preparation. Another powerful driver of overconfidence is social validation. Society values confidence, often associating it with competence, leadership, and decisiveness. People who project confidence, whether grounded in reality or not, tend to be viewed as more capable, which in turn reinforces their own sense of self-belief. This positive feedback loop makes it easy for overconfidence to flourish, as individuals are rewarded for projecting certainty, regardless of whether that certainty is justified. This tendency can be particularly pronounced in high-stakes environments, like business or politics, where the appearance of confidence can carry as much weight as actual expertise. Additionally, our brains are wired to favor stories of success. When we achieve something challenging, the satisfaction reinforces our belief in our abilities. Rarely do we focus on the role of luck, support from others, or circumstances beyond our control. By attributing success mainly to our skill, we build a narrative that promotes overconfidence, making it difficult to recognize the nuanced, often unpredictable factors that influence outcomes. Everyday manifestations of overconfidence. The effects of overconfidence are pervasive, impacting everything from our financial choices to our interpersonal relationships. Consider, for instance, the field of investing. Investors who experience early gains may start to believe in their own financial insight, feeling sure they can predict market trends and time trades accurately. Buoyed by a sense of expertise, they might begin to take bigger risks, investing in volatile stocks or speculative ventures. Unfortunately, this overconfidence often blinds them to the risks, leading to losses when the market shifts unpredictably. It's a common saying in finance that past performance does not guarantee future results, yet overconfident investors frequently disregard this caution, seeing their previous success as proof of future reliability. The professional world is another arena where overconfidence often plays out. A project manager who has successfully led previous initiatives may assume they can tackle increasingly complex projects without necessarily adapting their strategies or seeking additional input. Their past successes provide a sense of certainty, leading them to underestimate new challenges or assume they can overcome difficulties through sheer skill alone. This can lead to misjudgments, inadequate planning, and missed deadlines when unexpected hurdles arise. In academia, overconfidence can sometimes lead students to underestimate the complexity of a subject or overestimate their understanding after a few successful exams. This may lead them to spend less time studying or preparing for future tests, only to find themselves struggling when they encounter more difficult material. A similar phenomenon occurs in sports, where athletes might push themselves too hard or ignore warning signs of injury, assuming their skills or resilience will carry them through. Overconfidence in one's abilities can, in these cases, lead to setbacks or injuries that could have been avoided with a more cautious approach. Relationships, too, are influenced by overconfidence. We may assume we know a friend or partner so well that we overlook changes in their feelings or needs. Overconfidence can lead us to ignore the subtleties of human dynamics, making us blind to problems until they become crises. This bias prevents us from empathizing fully or seeking input, potentially damaging trust and intimacy with others. The risks of overconfidence in high-stakes situations. The impact of overconfidence grows exponentially in high-stakes situations. Think about medical professionals who, despite the immense importance of their work, are not immune to this bias. A doctor who has successfully diagnosed and treated dozens of patients may become overconfident in their diagnostic ability, potentially overlooking a rare condition or dismissing a patient's symptoms because they know what's likely. While medical training emphasizes caution and evidence-based practice, the high level of confidence often necessary in this field can sometimes blur the line, leading even skilled professionals to miss crucial details. Overconfidence also affects leaders and policymakers. History offers ample examples of leaders who believed so strongly in their vision that they ignored or downplayed opposing viewpoints, often with disastrous consequences. For instance, during wartime, political leaders may overestimate their country's military strength or underestimate the resilience of their opponent, leading to strategic missteps. Overconfidence can prevent leaders from considering alternative approaches, acknowledging their own limits, or asking for advice from experienced advisors, resulting in actions that have far-reaching and sometimes devastating consequences. In entrepreneurship, overconfidence often manifests as what's called founder's syndrome. When founders of a startup believe so deeply in their product or vision that they ignore market signals, consumer feedback, or financial limitations, they risk leading the company into unsustainable territory. The desire to see their dream come true makes it difficult for them to acknowledge when changes are needed, whether that's pivoting the product, seeking input from others, or even stepping down to allow more experienced leadership. This form of overconfidence doesn't only endanger the founder's reputation but also the livelihood of employees, investors, and stakeholders who depend on the company's success. The fine line between confidence and overconfidence. It's worth noting that confidence itself is not inherently negative. In fact, confidence is often necessary to pursue challenging goals, lead effectively, and innovate. Confidence enables us to take risks, believe in our abilities, and step outside our comfort zones. The key difference between healthy confidence and overconfidence lies in self-awareness and adaptability. Healthy confidence acknowledges uncertainty. It involves recognizing strengths while also understanding limitations and being open to feedback or alternative perspectives. Confident individuals approach challenges with a sense of curiosity and flexibility, willing to adjust their approach when faced with new information. Overconfidence, on the other hand, is rigid, seeing confidence as synonymous with certainty. Overconfident individuals often ignore feedback, downplay risks, and push forward with their perspective, regardless of contradictory evidence. One way to gauge whether confidence has crossed into overconfidence is to examine the role of ego. Confidence is about trusting one's abilities, while overconfidence often centers around protecting one's self-image or sense of authority. A confident leader can admit when they're wrong. An overconfident leader sees admitting fault as a threat to their identity. Strategies for recognizing and mitigating overconfidence. Overcoming overconfidence bias requires both awareness and intentional strategies. The first step is to cultivate self-reflection. Regularly examining one's past decisions, especially those that didn't go as planned, can provide invaluable insight. Ask yourself questions like, what were my assumptions? Was I ignoring any information that contradicted my view? By analyzing decisions with the benefit of hindsight, you can begin to recognize patterns of overconfidence and take corrective steps. Another effective strategy is to actively seek out opposing perspectives. When faced with a major decision, challenge yourself to consider arguments against your position. This practice, known as counterfactual thinking, helps temper overconfidence by broadening your understanding of potential outcomes. Engaging with diverse opinions, whether from colleagues, mentors, or research, provides a more balanced view and reveals blind spots. Practicing humility is another powerful way to counter overconfidence. By embracing humility, we remind ourselves that no one has a monopoly on knowledge or success. Humility doesn't mean downplaying achievements but rather recognizing that even the most accomplished individuals have room to grow and learn. It's about remaining open to the reality that external factors, timing, and even luck play roles in our achievements, tempering our tendency to attribute everything solely to skill. Finally, developing a habit of curiosity can help keep overconfidence in check. Approaching challenges and projects with a beginner's mind allows us to ask questions, learn from others, and adapt to changing circumstances. Curiosity encourages us to explore new perspectives, creating a buffer against the tunnel vision that often accompanies overconfidence. Overconfidence bias in context, real-world consequences and insights. To illustrate the power of overconfidence, let's look at a famous example from the world of business: Kodak. For much of the 20th century, Kodak was a giant in the photography industry, leading the market in film sales. In the 1970s, however, a Kodak engineer invented the digital camera. Despite this innovation, the company largely ignored it, confident that film photography would remain the dominant format. This overconfidence ultimately contributed to Kodak's downfall. As the digital market expanded, Kodak struggled to adapt, eventually declaring bankruptcy in 2012. Overconfidence in their business model and dismissing digital photography as a passing trend kept Kodak from adjusting to a rapidly changing industry. In the field of aviation, overconfidence can also be a significant hazard. Pilots, especially experienced ones, sometimes fall prey to overestimating their skill, resulting in decisions that put safety at risk. This phenomenon, often referred to as get-there-itis, describes the overconfident drive to push on toward a destination despite adverse weather or mechanical issues. Tragically, this bias has led to avoidable accidents. Today, aviation training places a strong emphasis on humility, teamwork, and risk assessment to combat the effects of overconfidence. Embracing informed confidence. The path beyond overconfidence isn't about doubting ourselves but about refining our confidence to include flexibility, openness, and realism. When we cultivate a balanced sense of confidence, we're better equipped to make thoughtful decisions, learn from our experiences, and grow in ways that rigid overconfidence can never allow. Overconfidence bias teaches us that certainty is often an illusion, one that can prevent us from seeing the world as it truly is. By embracing a confident yet curious mindset, we can approach challenges with a genuine willingness to adapt and learn, even if it means acknowledging when we don't have all the answers. Chapter 8: Hindsight Bias, the I knew it all along fallacy. Think back to a time when an unexpected event unfolded, a surprising outcome in a sports match, an unexpected twist in a friend's life, or perhaps a global event you hadn't anticipated. After learning the outcome, did you find yourself thinking, "I should have seen that coming," or "it was obvious all along"? This phenomenon is called hindsight bias, often referred to as the I knew it all along fallacy. It's the cognitive bias that leads us to believe, after an event has occurred, that we foresaw it with clarity, even though in reality, we may not have anticipated it at all. Hindsight bias skews our understanding of past events and gives us an inflated sense of predictability. When we look back on a situation with the outcome already in mind, our brains rearrange the narrative, convincing us that we knew the outcome all along. This bias affects not only our perception of the past but also our approach to future decisions, often making us feel overly confident in our ability to predict events. The consequence? We become less open to considering multiple outcomes, overly simplifying complex situations, and underestimating the value of cautious preparation. Why hindsight bias occurs? The roots of hindsight bias lie in our mind's need for coherence. Our brains are natural storytellers, constantly seeking to make sense of the world. When an event's outcome is known, our minds often revise the story to fit that ending. This storytelling impulse satisfies our desire for order, making the sequence of events appear more logical and inevitable. By reshaping the past, hindsight bias gives us a comforting sense of control, as if the world operates in clear, predictable patterns. Unfortunately, this illusion of order can prevent us from seeing the complexities and uncertainties that characterize real-life situations. Another driver of hindsight bias is cognitive ease, our tendency to favor information that's easy to understand and recall. When an event has already occurred, our brains can quickly assemble a simple, cohesive narrative that seems obvious in hindsight. We look back and cherry-pick the signs that match the outcome, creating a neat storyline that feels intuitively correct. This cognitive shortcut simplifies our view of the past but also strips away the complexities that were present before the outcome was known. Emotion plays a significant role in hindsight bias as well. When we experience strong emotions around an event, such as relief, disappointment, or excitement, we tend to remember those emotions vividly. Our brains then retroactively apply this emotional intensity to the lead-up to the event, giving us the sense that we knew it would happen, even if that knowledge is entirely constructed after the fact. Everyday examples of hindsight bias. Hindsight bias manifests in many aspects of our daily lives, shaping our perception of events big and small. Take sports, for example. Fans often experience this bias when looking back on a match. After a game ends, particularly if the outcome is surprising, fans will claim they knew the star player would make a winning play or that the underdog team would upset the favorites. They recall moments that seem like telltale signs of the final score and overlook details that contradict the outcome. This revisionist view makes the unpredictable seem predictable, reshaping memories to fit the result. The workplace is another environment where hindsight bias frequently occurs. Consider a manager who hires a promising candidate for a new role. If the candidate excels, the manager might think, "I could tell from the interview that they would be a star." On the other hand, if the candidate performs poorly, the manager may retrospectively notice supposed red flags that hinted at the outcome. By revising their memory to fit the outcome, the manager inadvertently bolsters their sense of insight and predictive ability. Hindsight bias makes both success and failure seem more foreseeable than they were in reality, reinforcing a false sense of expertise. Personal relationships are also susceptible to this bias. Imagine a friend goes through a breakup, and you suddenly recall moments that, in hindsight, appear to have predicted the end of the relationship. Maybe you remember subtle disagreements or moments of discomfort. At the time, these moments seem trivial or unremarkable, but with the breakup in mind, they now appear like clear signs. This tendency not only simplifies complex relational dynamics but can also lead to self-blame or an inflated sense of knowing better after the fact. Hindsight bias also affects larger societal events, such as political shifts or financial crises. After a major event, like an economic recession, people look back and identify signs that should have warned them of the impending downturn. However, before the event, these signs were often ambiguous and interpreted in various ways. Once the outcome is clear, it's easy to overestimate the predictability of complex phenomena, thinking that the warning signs were obvious all along, even though experts and analysts themselves struggled to predict it. The consequences of hindsight bias. While hindsight bias may seem harmless, its effects can be far-reaching. By creating a false sense of predictability, this bias can lead us to become overly confident in our judgments and decisions. If we believe that events are easily foreseeable, we're less likely to prepare for unexpected outcomes or take seriously the uncertainties that exist in any decision. This overconfidence can, in turn, lead to riskier behaviors as we trust that we'll see it coming next time, even though real-world events are rarely so predictable. Hindsight bias also has implications for learning and growth. When we think we knew it all along, we miss opportunities to examine the real reasons behind our decisions and outcomes. Instead of reflecting on the complexities of a situation, we oversimplify, believing that the outcome was inevitable. This can stifle our ability to learn from experiences, as we fail to critically analyze what truly contributed to an outcome. In the workplace, for example, hindsight bias can prevent teams from improving project planning or risk management if they believe that any missteps were obvious and could have been avoided with minimal effort. In legal and medical fields, hindsight bias can have significant consequences. In medicine, for example, healthcare professionals might look back on a misdiagnosis and believe the correct diagnosis was obvious, undermining an understanding of the diagnostic challenges faced in real time. This bias can lead to unfair judgments of medical professionals, as their decision-making processes are judged through the lens of known outcomes rather than the ambiguity of the initial situation. Similarly, in the legal realm, hindsight bias can affect juries and judges, who may see the signs of a defendant's guilt as clear only because they know the final verdict. This can result in unjust judgments, as the complexities and uncertainties of the case are overshadowed by hindsight. Recognizing and reducing hindsight bias. To mitigate hindsight bias, it's important to adopt a mindset of genuine curiosity and openness to uncertainty. Rather than approaching situations with a sense of assumed certainty, try to remain aware of the full range of possibilities, even after an outcome is known. This can be achieved by actively questioning your recollection of events and reminding yourself of the complexities that were present before the outcome was clear. One helpful approach is to revisit your initial thought process. When a situation is resolved, take time to reflect on what you actually knew and felt at the beginning. What assumptions did you make? What options did you consider? By mentally rewinding to your initial perspective, you can gain a more realistic view of how much was actually predictable. This practice keeps you anchored in the reality of uncertainty, making it less likely that you'll fall into the trap of hindsight bias. Journaling can be a powerful tool for reducing hindsight bias. By keeping a record of your thoughts, predictions, and reasons for making certain choices, you create a snapshot of your genuine mindset at the time. When you look back later, these records prevent you from rewriting your memory to fit the outcome. Instead, you can see how your thought process evolved and recognize any biases or assumptions that may have influenced your decisions. Another effective method is to practice counterfactual thinking, where you actively consider alternative outcomes. If something turned out a certain way, imagine what would have happened if conditions had been different. What if another candidate had been hired? What if an investment decision hadn't paid off? By contemplating other scenarios, you cultivate a more flexible perspective, realizing that outcomes are often shaped by numerous unpredictable factors rather than being inevitable. Lastly, acknowledge the role of luck and external factors. Hindsight bias often causes us to overlook the impact of circumstances beyond our control, leading us to assume that outcomes were the result of personal insight or skill alone. By recognizing that luck, timing, and external factors play significant roles in shaping events, you can avoid falling into the trap of seeing outcomes as inevitable. This awareness not only tempers overconfidence but also promotes a balanced understanding of success and failure. Real-world examples of hindsight bias. To see hindsight bias in action, consider the 2008 financial crisis. In the years leading up to it, few analysts, investors, or policymakers accurately predicted the collapse of the housing market and the subsequent recession. However, after the crisis unfolded, many people looked back and claimed that the warning signs were obvious: over-leveraged banks, risky lending practices, and inflated housing prices. In reality, these signs were interpreted in various ways before the crisis, with many experts downplaying the risks or assuming the market would stabilize. Hindsight bias made the crisis seem more predictable than it actually was, influencing subsequent regulatory changes and public perception. Another example is the 2016 U.S. presidential election, which took many analysts and pollsters by surprise. After the election, some commentators claimed they saw it coming all along, pointing to moments during the campaign that, in hindsight, seemed like clear indicators of the final outcome. Yet, throughout the campaign, the election was widely regarded as unpredictable, with fluctuating polls and numerous variables. Hindsight bias simplified the complex dynamics of the election, making it seem as though the result was obvious when, in reality, it was anything but. Moving forward, embracing uncertainty and learning from the past. Hindsight bias teaches us a powerful lesson about the nature of knowledge. What seems obvious in retrospect was rarely so clear in the moment. By acknowledging this truth, we can cultivate a more humble and open-minded approach to understanding events and outcomes. Instead of rewriting the past to fit a narrative of inevitability, we can embrace the uncertainty and complexity that characterize life's twists and turns. Letting go of hindsight bias requires us to develop a genuine respect for uncertainty, recognizing that the future is rarely as predictable as it seems in hindsight. By learning to view past events without the distortion of "I knew it all along," we can better prepare for the future, understanding that the unexpected will always be a part of our journey. Chapter 9: Groupthink, the Pitfalls of Collective Decision-Making. Imagine you're in a meeting with a team at work. The group is discussing a new project proposal, and everyone seems excited. While you have some reservations about potential risks, you hesitate to speak up, noticing how everyone else appears enthusiastic. You tell yourself, maybe I'm overthinking this, and eventually go along with the group's consensus. This scenario exemplifies a powerful psychological bias known as groupthink, where the desire for unity or harmony within a group suppresses individual opinions, critical thinking, and dissent. Groupthink is more than just going with the flow. It's a phenomenon that can stifle independent thought, cloud decision-making, and sometimes lead to serious consequences. When groupthink takes hold, members of a team or community prioritize consensus over quality, often brushing aside doubts or overlooking alternative perspectives. This bias isn't always intentional. It happens subtly as people strive to maintain the cohesion of the group, assuming that agreeing is better than challenging. However, when everyone moves in the same direction without critical examination, the group risks making flawed or even dangerous decisions. Why groupthink happens? Groupthink stems from a mix of social and psychological forces, including our need for belonging, the pressure to conform, and the influence of authority figures. One of the strongest drivers of groupthink is the need for social acceptance. Humans are social creatures by nature, and being part of a group brings comfort and a sense of identity. Expressing disagreement within a group can feel uncomfortable, creating tension and possibly risking exclusion. To avoid standing out or alienating themselves, individuals might suppress personal concerns, choosing instead to conform to the dominant opinion, even if they have doubts. Another significant factor in groupthink is the pressure to conform. When most people in a group appear to be in agreement, individuals often feel compelled to align with the majority view. This tendency can be especially strong in hierarchical environments where people feel reluctant to challenge authority figures or senior members. In a corporate setting, for example, if the CEO or project leader expresses a preference, employees might hesitate to voice differing opinions for fear of seeming disrespectful or uncooperative. This dynamic is known as deference to authority and can stifle open discussion, leading the group to follow a single perspective without fully exploring alternatives. Groupthink is also fueled by a psychological shortcut known as pluralistic ignorance. The belief that because no one else is voicing concerns, everyone else must genuinely agree. In reality, others in the group may also harbor doubts but assume they are the only ones. This assumption creates a cycle where everyone remains silent, reinforcing the appearance of consensus and, ironically, deepening each person's reluctance to speak up. This quiet conformity feeds groupthink, as the group collectively moves forward without considering diverse viewpoints. The consequences of groupthink. The impact of groupthink can be seen in a range of decisions, from everyday business choices to historical events. One of the classic examples is the ill-fated launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986. Engineers had expressed concerns about the shuttle's O-rings, a critical component that could fail in cold temperatures. However, due to pressure to launch on schedule and a reluctance to push back against the collective momentum, these warnings went unheeded. The shuttle launched as planned, only to tragically disintegrate shortly after liftoff, resulting in the deaths of 7 astronauts. Investigations later revealed that groupthink had played a significant role, as individuals failed to assert their concerns in the face of the group's drive to proceed. Groupthink doesn't only affect large, high-stakes decisions. It also influences more routine choices in workplaces, schools, and social circles. In a corporate setting, groupthink can lead to flawed strategic decisions. Imagine a company launching a new product without adequate testing because everyone in the team believes it will succeed. If dissenting voices are ignored or dismissed, the team may overlook potential issues, resulting in a failed product launch, financial losses, and damage to the company's reputation. Groupthink leads to an echo chamber effect, where only ideas that align with the dominant perspective are considered, leaving little room for critical analysis. Another effect of groupthink is the polarization of opinions. When individuals are surrounded by like-minded voices, their views can become more extreme. In political groups, for instance, groupthink can lead to more radical positions, as each person's ideas reinforce the group's shared beliefs. This dynamic discourages moderation, as those who might otherwise hold nuanced views feel pressured to adopt the group's stance fully. The result is often a rigid and polarized perspective, where alternative solutions or compromise become difficult, if not impossible. In personal relationships, groupthink can show up subtly, as friend groups or families agree on certain views or behaviors without question. This may mean going along with a decision that feels uncomfortable but aligns with the group's expectation, such as making a risky financial choice, adopting a lifestyle change, or choosing activities that don't match everyone's interests. Over time, groupthink can erode individuality within relationships, as people conform to shared expectations rather than expressing personal preferences. Identifying groupthink in real time. Recognizing groupthink as it happens requires acute self-awareness and social awareness. One telltale sign of groupthink is an unusually quick consensus. If a decision seems to gain unanimous approval without much discussion or debate, it's worth pausing to consider whether groupthink may be at play. When everyone agrees instantly, it's possible that individual voices are being suppressed, especially if the decision is complex and could reasonably invite differing opinions. Another red flag is self-censorship, where people hold back dissenting ideas or feedback. You might notice this in meetings where someone seems hesitant to speak or quickly retracts a point after mild pushback. People who engage in self-censorship often feel that voicing their concerns would disrupt the group's harmony or be seen as problematic. They may appear quiet, nodding along without contributing alternative views, as though silently conceding to the majority. Groupthink is also marked by a sense of invulnerability within the group. Members may express unwarranted confidence in their decision, dismissing risks or downplaying potential issues. This "we can't be wrong" attitude prevents the group from realistically assessing challenges or vulnerabilities. In such cases, the group's shared belief in its rightness creates a barrier to critical thinking, making it easy to overlook potential pitfalls or weaknesses. Lastly, mind guards, people who act as self-appointed protectors of the group's consensus, are common in groupthink-prone environments. These individuals may discourage dissent, either subtly or overtly, by redirecting discussions or dismissing opposing viewpoints. Mind guards believe they're helping the group by keeping it on track, but in reality, they're further deepening the groupthink cycle, ensuring that only favorable information reaches the group's attention. Overcoming groupthink. Fostering a culture of openness. Counteracting groupthink requires a conscious commitment to creating an environment where diverse ideas are encouraged and valued. One of the most effective strategies is to promote a culture of open dialogue. This means actively inviting feedback and dissenting opinions, particularly from those who may feel uncomfortable challenging the group. Leaders can play a crucial role here by explicitly encouraging differing perspectives, making it clear that thoughtful disagreement is not only accepted but welcomed. Another powerful approach is to appoint a devil's advocate in group discussions. This person's role is to question assumptions, challenge the consensus, and raise potential issues. By designating someone to argue against the group's direction, teams can prevent a premature consensus and ensure that multiple perspectives are considered. The devil's advocate role reduces the risk of groupthink by breaking the illusion of unanimous agreement and allowing others to see that dissent can lead to a more balanced, well-rounded decision. Encouraging individual reflection before group discussions can also help reduce groupthink. When people form their opinions independently before engaging with the group, they are less likely to conform automatically. Individual reflection provides an opportunity for people to develop and voice their own ideas, making it easier to bring unique viewpoints to the table. This practice also helps prevent the echo chamber effect, as each person arrives with a distinct perspective rather than simply mirroring the group. The importance of diverse voices. A key to preventing groupthink lies in actively seeking out diverse voices. Research consistently shows that diversity in teams, whether in terms of background, experience, or perspective, leads to better decision-making. When groups include members with varied viewpoints, it becomes harder for a single perspective to dominate, creating a natural check against groupthink. Diversity encourages healthy debate, as each person brings a unique lens to the discussion, helping the group identify blind spots and consider a broader range of solutions. Companies and organizations that prioritize diversity are often better equipped to avoid groupthink and the costly mistakes it can lead to. For example, in product development, a team composed of individuals from diverse demographic and professional backgrounds is more likely to identify and address flaws that a more homogeneous group might overlook. This is because each person's background informs their perspective, revealing issues that might otherwise go unrecognized. The result is a product or solution that better serves a wider audience and is less prone to oversights or unintended biases. Real-world examples of groupthink and its consequences. One of the most well-known examples of groupthink occurred during the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. The U.S. government, under President Kennedy, planned a covert operation to overthrow the Cuban government, expecting it to be quick and successful. Advisors around Kennedy, reluctant to challenge the consensus or voice doubts, allowed the plan to proceed despite clear risks. The operation ended in disaster, with many analysts later pointing to groupthink as a critical factor. In this case, the desire for unity and support for the president led advisors to suppress their doubts, resulting in a flawed and costly decision. In corporate history, the collapse of Enron also highlights the dangers of groupthink. Enron's leaders fostered a culture of aggressive growth and risk-taking, creating a highly competitive environment where employees felt pressured to conform to the company's vision. Those who raised concerns about the company's financial practices were marginalized or ignored, reinforcing a culture of unchecked ambition. This culture of conformity contributed to Enron's eventual downfall, as employees continued to ignore red flags until the company's financial misdeeds became impossible to conceal. Embracing independent thinking and constructive dissent. Understanding groupthink reminds us of the importance of cultivating independent thought and constructive dissent within any group, team, or community. While unity and harmony are valuable, they should never come at the cost of critical thinking or open debate. Learning to recognize and counteract groupthink empowers us to make better, more informed decisions, particularly when the stakes are high. Moving beyond groupthink isn't about encouraging conflict for conflict's sake, but rather about fostering an environment where questioning and discussion are seen as tools for growth and improvement. By valuing independent thinking and promoting diversity of thought, groups can avoid the pitfalls of conformity and make decisions that are truly reflective of all voices involved. Chapter 10: Combating Cognitive Bias, Strategies for Better Thinking. As we've journeyed through the world of cognitive biases, from confirmation bias to groupthink, we've seen how these mental shortcuts shape our perceptions, influence our decisions, and sometimes lead us astray. These biases are, at their core, natural human tendencies, designed to simplify the complex task of navigating an uncertain world. Yet, while they can be helpful, they often cloud our judgment and limit our potential for growth and clear thinking. Now, in this final chapter, we'll focus on practical strategies for recognizing and counteracting these biases in our daily lives, empowering ourselves to make more thoughtful, objective, and well-informed decisions. The path to better thinking is not about eradicating biases entirely, which is neither possible nor desirable. Rather, it's about developing self-awareness and cultivating habits that allow us to question, reflect, and approach situations with a more open and balanced mind. Through a blend of mindfulness, critical thinking, and intentional practices, we can reduce the influence of biases, bringing clarity and objectivity to our thought processes. The power of self-awareness. The foundation of overcoming cognitive bias lies in self-awareness. Awareness enables us to catch biases in action, giving us the chance to pause, reflect, and question our initial judgments. Without awareness, biases remain hidden, subtly shaping our thoughts and actions without our realizing it. Cultivating self-awareness requires us to consistently observe our own thinking, asking ourselves questions like, why am I drawn to this perspective? Am I dismissing other viewpoints too quickly? One powerful method for building self-awareness is mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness encourages us to become more attuned to our thoughts, emotions, and reactions, helping us observe our mental processes without judgment. This practice creates a mental space between ourselves and our thoughts, allowing us to examine them more objectively. Over time, mindfulness can reveal patterns in our thinking, showing us where certain biases like confirmation bias or overconfidence tend to arise. By developing this level of insight, we can learn to recognize bias as it emerges and make a conscious choice to respond differently. Another way to build self-awareness is to keep a decision journal. In this journal, you can record significant decisions, noting your reasoning, expectations, and any emotions you felt at the time. Then, after the outcome unfolds, revisit your notes to see if biases played a role in your thought process. This practice not only helps uncover patterns of bias but also allows you to learn from your decisions, refining your judgment over time. The simple act of writing down your thought process encourages you to slow down, reflect, and consider alternative perspectives, fostering a more deliberate approach to decision-making. Practicing intellectual humility. Intellectual humility is the recognition that we don't have all the answers and that our knowledge and understanding are limited. This humility doesn't mean downplaying our abilities. Rather, it means remaining open to learning, questioning, and re-evaluating our beliefs. When we cultivate intellectual humility, we become more willing to acknowledge the possibility of error and more receptive to alternative viewpoints, making it easier to combat biases like overconfidence or confirmation bias. One effective way to practice intellectual humility is to actively seek out information that contradicts your views. For instance, if you have strong opinions on a particular topic, make a habit of reading reputable sources with opposing perspectives. This doesn't mean you need to adopt these views, but by exposing yourself to diverse viewpoints, you become less entrenched in your own beliefs and more open to seeing the strengths and weaknesses in all arguments. Over time, this practice tempers the impact of confirmation bias, helping you make decisions based on a fuller understanding of the situation. In discussions or debates, practicing intellectual humility involves asking more questions than giving answers. Instead of asserting your viewpoint, try to understand the other person's reasoning by asking open-ended questions like, how did you come to that conclusion? What factors influenced your perspective? This approach not only broadens your understanding but also fosters a more collaborative, respectful exchange of ideas. Intellectual humility teaches us that listening is as valuable as speaking and that often, the wisest choice is to approach conversations with curiosity rather than certainty. Embracing critical thinking. Critical thinking is one of the most effective tools for reducing cognitive bias. At its core, critical thinking involves evaluating information logically, assessing evidence, and questioning assumptions. By practicing critical thinking, we can identify and challenge biases before they cloud our judgment. One helpful critical thinking technique is the 5 whys method. When faced with a decision or a belief, ask yourself why 5 times to dig deeper into your reasoning. This process helps uncover the assumptions underlying your thought process, bringing biases to the surface. For example, if you're confident that a project will succeed, ask yourself why you believe this. Each why response should go deeper, revealing potential blind spots or areas where biases like overconfidence may be influencing your perspective. By forcing yourself to articulate your reasoning, the 5 whys method encourages you to examine your assumptions critically and thoroughly. Another effective approach is to reframe your perspective by considering the opposite. Known as considering the opposite, this technique involves intentionally exploring the reasons why your belief or assumption might be wrong. For instance, if you're certain that a plan will succeed, challenge yourself to list reasons it might fail. This exercise forces you to look beyond your initial impression and consider factors you might have overlooked, providing a more balanced view. By training yourself to think critically in this way, you can guard against biases like confirmation bias and the halo effect, which often lead us to ignore conflicting information. Creating a culture of feedback and dissent. In group settings, one of the most effective ways to prevent biases like groupthink is to encourage a culture of feedback and constructive dissent. When everyone feels comfortable sharing their opinions, even if they differ from the majority, the group benefits from a broader range of perspectives, reducing the risk of flawed decision-making. This culture doesn't just emerge on its own. It requires leaders and team members to actively create an environment where all voices are respected and heard. One powerful way to foster this culture is to appoint a devil's advocate in group discussions. The devil's advocate's role is to question assumptions, challenge the group's direction, and highlight potential flaws in the reasoning. By formalizing dissent, the devil's advocate makes it acceptable, even expected, to voice disagreement. This technique not only breaks up the consensus effect but also encourages each team member to think more critically, preventing premature agreement and fostering a more balanced decision-making process. Another strategy is to implement structured decision-making processes that encourage input from all members before any consensus is reached. For instance, you can ask each person to write down their thoughts independently before sharing them with the group. This ensures that individual perspectives are preserved, rather than conforming to the first dominant idea that arises. Structured methods help counteract biases like anchoring and the bandwagon effect, both of which can lead people to adopt opinions based on the initial voices they hear. Practicing mindful decision-making. In the fast-paced, decision-filled world we live in, biases often arise because we make choices too quickly. Mindful decision-making is the practice of slowing down and bringing intentionality to our thought processes. By taking the time to examine our assumptions, weigh evidence, and consider alternatives, we can make more informed decisions. To practice mindful decision-making, start by creating a habit of pausing before making important choices. In these moments, ask yourself a few key questions. Am I rushing this decision? Could I benefit from more information? Are there any biases influencing my perspective? By incorporating this pause, you create space to reflect, increasing the chances of identifying potential biases before they shape your actions. Visualization can also be a powerful tool in mindful decision-making. Imagine a range of possible outcomes, both positive and negative, for any significant decision. Picture yourself in each scenario and consider how it might feel, what challenges might arise, and what benefits you'd experience. This exercise helps you move beyond a singular vision of success or failure, giving you a clearer picture of the risks and rewards involved. Visualization also tempers the effects of biases like overconfidence and optimism bias, as it reminds us of the unpredictable nature of reality. Seeking diverse perspectives. When we engage only with people who share similar backgrounds, beliefs, or experiences, our worldview becomes narrow, reinforcing our existing biases. Actively seeking out diverse perspectives challenges us to think differently, question our assumptions, and expand our understanding. Exposure to different viewpoints doesn't just broaden our thinking. It also creates a more balanced approach to decision-making, making it harder for biases to thrive. Engaging with people from different fields, cultures, or ideologies can provide valuable insights that you wouldn't gain from within your own echo chamber. For example, if you're facing a tough business decision, talking with someone from a completely different industry or background might reveal options you hadn't considered. Diversity fosters innovation and creativity, as varied perspectives introduce ideas and solutions that challenge conventional thinking. By actively seeking diverse voices, you equip yourself with a well-rounded view, which is invaluable in avoiding biases that stem from limited perspectives. Accepting ambiguity and embracing uncertainty. Finally, one of the most effective ways to reduce cognitive bias is to embrace the uncertainty and ambiguity of life. Many biases, such as hindsight bias or the availability heuristic, arise because we crave certainty and predictability. But the reality is that life is filled with uncertainty, and outcomes are often shaped by unpredictable factors. Instead of striving to eliminate uncertainty, try to become more comfortable with it. Accepting that you can't always predict or control outcomes fosters a mindset of openness and adaptability. This acceptance helps reduce biases that arise from the desire for control or certainty, allowing you to make decisions based on what's actually known, rather than what feels certain. This approach also makes us more resilient, as we're less likely to be thrown off course by unexpected events or disappointed when things don't go as planned. A lifelong practice of mindful thinking. Combating cognitive bias is not a one-time effort. It's a lifelong practice of self-reflection, curiosity, and humility. By implementing these strategies, cultivating self-awareness, practicing intellectual humility, embracing critical thinking, fostering open-minded discussions, and embracing uncertainty, we develop the tools to recognize and reduce biases in our lives. As we move forward, Let's remember that the goal is not to eliminate biases entirely but to keep them in check. When we strive for clearer, more balanced thinking, we make choices that are more aligned with reality, allowing us to navigate life's complexities with greater wisdom and integrity. By approaching each decision with mindfulness and a commitment to growth, we empower ourselves to see the world, and ourselves, more clearly. In closing, remember that the journey to better thinking is ongoing. Every choice, reflection, and interaction is an opportunity to practice awareness and refine our understanding. Through patience and practice, we can cultivate a mindset that values truth over certainty, curiosity over convenience, and growth over comfort. Let this journey toward mindful thinking be a guiding force, opening doors to more thoughtful, intentional, and fulfilling experiences in every aspect of life. Conclusion: embracing awareness in a biased world. Throughout this journey into the world of cognitive biases, we've uncovered the many ways our minds can deceive us. From confirmation bias and the halo effect to groupthink and overconfidence, each chapter has revealed how these invisible forces shape our thoughts, judgments, and decisions. We've seen that biases are not merely quirks of the mind but deeply ingrained mechanisms that affect everything from our personal relationships to global events. The challenge isn't to eliminate these biases, an impossible task, but to recognize them and manage their influence, striving for clarity and balance in our thinking. Cognitive biases are part of being human. They evolved to help us make quick decisions in a complex world. In many ways, they served our ancestors well, helping them survive and adapt in environments where swift action was critical. Yet, in today's world, where we are inundated with information and face increasingly complex decisions, these same shortcuts often lead us astray. The good news is that with awareness, intention, and practice, we can learn to navigate our biases more effectively, making choices that are thoughtful and aligned with our real goals and values. The power of awareness. The first and most crucial step in combating cognitive bias is awareness. It's about acknowledging that biases are not something other people experience. They are a universal part of human cognition. This recognition empowers us to observe our own thinking patterns without judgment. Rather than seeing bias as a flaw, we begin to understand it as a natural but sometimes misguided process that can be corrected with the right tools. By developing a habit of self-reflection, we can start to catch biases as they occur. This isn't always easy, and it requires patience and humility. It means becoming comfortable with the idea that our initial impressions, no matter how confident or logical they may seem, could be shaped by factors we aren't fully aware of. It means pausing before making a decision, questioning our assumptions, and being willing to adjust our views when new information comes to light. The importance of flexibility and adaptability. In addition to awareness, flexibility and adaptability are crucial in managing cognitive biases. Biases often thrive in rigid thinking, where certainty and routine override curiosity and openness. Developing a flexible mindset involves being open to changing one's mind, adapting to new information, and questioning long-held beliefs. This approach doesn't mean being indecisive or lacking conviction. It means cultivating a willingness to adjust and grow, understanding that the world is complex and constantly evolving. Flexibility also means accepting that ambiguity and uncertainty are part of life. Many biases, such as hindsight bias and the availability heuristic, arise because we crave predictability and seek to make sense of events in ways that feel certain. However, life rarely offers neat, predictable patterns. By embracing uncertainty, we can move beyond the illusion of control, making decisions that are more realistic and grounded. This openness allows us to better navigate challenges, respond to unexpected outcomes, and remain resilient in the face of ambiguity. Embracing diversity in thought. To truly manage cognitive bias, we must also recognize the value of diversity in thought. Engaging with people who have different perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences broadens our understanding of the world and helps us identify our own blind spots. When we surround ourselves with diverse voices, we create a buffer against the echo chambers and groupthink dynamics that reinforce biases. Organizations, communities, and social groups thrive when they prioritize diversity and open dialogue. Diverse teams make better decisions because they draw from a wider range of experiences and viewpoints. This principle holds true on an individual level as well. By actively seeking out different perspectives, engaging in challenging conversations, and learning from people whose experiences differ from our own, we can build a more nuanced and balanced view of the world. Building a bias-resilient mindset. One of the most powerful takeaways from understanding cognitive biases is the opportunity to build a bias-resilient mindset. This means developing habits and strategies that make us less vulnerable to the influence of biases. Practicing mindfulness, as discussed, helps us observe our thoughts without immediate judgment, creating space to recognize when biases are affecting our thinking. Another key aspect of a bias-resilient mindset is intellectual humility. Acknowledging that we don't have all the answers and that our understanding is always evolving keeps us open to learning and growth. Humility encourages us to seek feedback, consider alternative explanations, and question our own assumptions, helping us to stay grounded and receptive to new information. A bias-resilient mindset also involves practicing patience, especially in decision-making. By slowing down and taking the time to consider various angles, gather more information, and reflect on potential outcomes, we can counteract the tendency to jump to conclusions based on initial impressions. This deliberate approach not only improves our decisions but also trains our minds to resist the pull of cognitive shortcuts that may lead us astray. The journey beyond bias. While we can't completely eliminate cognitive biases, the goal is not perfection but progress. Each step toward greater awareness and understanding of our mental processes brings us closer to making decisions that reflect our true values and goals. It's an ongoing journey, one that requires continuous learning, self-reflection, and openness to change. In practical terms, this journey means creating habits that reinforce unbiased thinking, regularly exposing ourselves to new ideas, engaging in self-reflection, practicing mindfulness, and seeking feedback from others. It means acknowledging our biases when they appear, not as failures, but as opportunities to grow and learn. The more we practice these habits, the more naturally they become integrated into our everyday thinking, helping us make clearer, more thoughtful choices. The world is full of uncertainty and complexity, but by embracing a mindset that values awareness, flexibility, and diversity, we can navigate these challenges with greater clarity and purpose. Cognitive biases will always be part of the human experience, but they don't have to control our lives. With the right tools, we can manage their influence, leading us to more balanced, informed, and meaningful outcomes. Embrace the process, not the perfection. Ultimately, the goal is not to eliminate biases completely but to develop a process that helps us manage them effectively. This process involves a commitment to self-awareness, critical thinking, and an openness to the perspectives of others. It's about embracing the journey of understanding our minds and using that knowledge to navigate our lives with intention. In a world where information is abundant and opinions are plentiful, the ability to think clearly and critically is more valuable than ever. By committing to a path of self-awareness and growth, we not only improve our own lives but also contribute to a culture where thoughtful, informed, and unbiased thinking is the norm. Embrace the journey, embrace the process, and let a deeper understanding of the mind guide you toward a more fulfilling, balanced, and intentional life.